Chapter 17 September 1967 Qinghai-Tibet Plateau. Zoe and Major Liu had never had a close, loving relationship, more like two strangers accidentally sharing a room. He had no interest in her work beyond its significance to China's defense, and she ignored his presence as best she could, except on the occasions when he demanded sex. Even then, she called him Major Liu, and to him, she was still Comrade Meng. She was ashamed of her marriage, ashamed of how common and uneducated he was. The pregnancy, in fact, her entire marriage, had been difficult and demanding. At first, she had denied the fact that she was pregnant, unwilling to bear Major Liu's child. She wore loose clothing to hide the bulge in her belly and exhausted herself with physical exertion, hoping to miscarry. But the heart beating inside her was relentless, as stubborn as she was. As she had so often before, eventually she resigned herself to the inevitable and gradually accepted the child. Perhaps it was compensation for her loveless marriage. Major Liu was stunned when she told him, eyeing her with equal parts doubt and bewilderment. Once he accepted the news, though, his usually dour face actually broke into a smile. "Let's name the baby Xiu Hong, Little Red. The child will be a little red soldier, born to defend our beloved motherland," he exclaimed. Xiu Hong arrived a week early, a big, healthy girl, but the long, difficult labor and loss of blood almost killed Zoe. Too weak to care for a newborn, and with Commissar Chu insisting she return to work as soon as possible, she had reluctantly agreed when Major Liu proposed sending Xiu Hong to Zoe's parents in Beijing. He argued they would be able to provide a better environment for raising a child. The only comfort and meaning she might find in life was taken away, and the only link they had holding them together was gone. 2 months ago, he'd started coughing at night, violently and incessantly. Soon after that, she noticed drops of blood around the toilet bowl. Though he looked wan and sallow, he brushed off her concerns, insisting he just had a cold and some diarrhea and would recover soon. After a couple of tries, she gave up, knowing he believed himself invincible, whether in the face of enemies or disease. At an assembly to recognize people's contributions to the success of the 5th hydrogen bomb test, Zoe was one of over a dozen people on stage. To cheers and applause, she received a Certificate of Merit, Citation Class 1, and was admitted as a party member, an honor she was forced to accept to show her love to the party. Commissar Chu beamed at the scientists. "We thank you, revolutionary scientists, for all your hard work, dedication, and contributions to the motherland. When we detonated our first nuclear bomb 3 years ago, both the Russians and Americans thought we must have stolen materials and technology from them. They doubted us and ridiculed our efforts. But now they are shocked and frightened by our achievements. China has made its own atomic bomb, one that is 100 times more powerful than the one that destroyed Hiroshima. Soon we will develop even more advanced weapons. We will destroy them before they attack us. Let them cry and beg for mercy. The People's Republic of China is untouchable. The Chinese Communist Party is forever victorious. Mao Zedong's thought is invincible." Amid the thunderous acclaim, no one noticed when Major Liu slumped over in his seat and slid out of his chair, crumpling to the floor. By the time the doctors diagnosed radiation poisoning, it was clear he was beyond any hope of recovery. Although Zoe didn't believe in ghosts, the isolation ward still made her nervous, in an eerie sense. Her footsteps echoed along the length of the dim, narrow corridor until she was sure someone was following her. But of course, nothing was there when she turned to look. When Major Liu and another soldier were first put in isolation, some visitors still braved the oppressive atmosphere. Now no one but she came to visit. Her husband was like a virus, so toxic and feared that people only spoke his name in whispers. Over the last 2 weeks, her emotions swung between panic, hope, and relief as Major Leo's health rapidly deteriorated. But now she was calm, accepting the fact that he would leave her soon. His current coma had persisted for 3 days. Would he wake up today? Would he briefly recover consciousness just before death? Chinese tradition spoke of a momentary awakening before death, like the last radiance of a setting sun. Surely he wouldn't go without having a last look, if only to gloat over me, she thought. He may not care about me, but surely he loves his daughter. The thought cheered her a little as she pushed open the door. The isolation ward was at the far north corner of the hospital, with 1 nurse's station, 2 cheerless rooms, and a toilet. Although less than 10 years old, the facility was already shabby. The bare bulb dangling from the ceiling reminded her of a hangman's noose. The first time she had come to visit, it had given her a creepy feeling, and she tried to avoid looking at it ever since. The scuffs and flakes of peeling paint looked like snakes and worms crawling up the walls. Even worse was the view from the window. Ever since the test of the H-bomb, the blue sky and harsh sun so typical of the Plateau had disappeared into a blanket of clouds so low and thick the very air seemed despondent. Incessant cold battered the compound, stinging like the scrape of a knife, made worse by the wind that rattled the windows like a portent of doom. Despite the distance between the test site and the research buildings, with every breath the workers sucked in dust and debris until the head doctor issued gauze masks to everyone on site. Zoe had experienced the nuclear winters from the previous bomb tests, but this was by far the most severe. Maybe I should wear the mask even in the ward, she thought idly, as she stared out the window. Major Liu looked no more pleasant than the landscape, she decided. Her husband had always been an ugly man, chubby and hairy, but now his wasted body looked more like a mummy, sunken and shriveled. Gone were his bluster and bullying, the booming voice, even his raspy breathing in sleep. Only the monotonous plink, plink, plink of his IV drip bottles indicated how he still clung to life. She inspected the bags to make sure they were in working order and sat down next to his bed, feeling exhausted and beaten. As she stared at his face, his eyelids fluttered, the only movement she had seen since last Saturday. Does he sense my presence, or the oppression of the unbearable nuclear winter? Is he dreaming, reliving his days of military glory, still trying to find the nomadic family in the desert? Or perhaps the moment he conquered me. The day before the super bomb was to be tested, Major Liu had received a report that one nomadic family had not reached a new pasture for the next season. Worried the family might be too close to the testing epicenter, he made one last attempt, taking a soldier with him to search. The jeep completed a circle around the testing epicenter, but there was no life to be found. He gave up and headed back to his observation hut. When a sudden piercing bright light flashed, he was sitting inside a jeep, miles away from the center of the explosion, using the towel around his neck to wipe his sweaty face. The blaze was like a polished sword reflecting the sun. He was so excited staring at this phenomenon through his binoculars, as if he were watching Japanese trains being blown up by the landmines his squad had planted. As the huge fireball drew close, he could feel the gigantic force of the blast starting to attack him. Within seconds, the sharp, painful, and screeching boom pierced through his eardrums. Before he had time to drop the binoculars and cover his ears, he lost consciousness. Despite his humiliating and abysmal behavior toward her, Zoe felt a twinge of guilt at Major Liu's current state of health. She knew the truth. She had killed him with the hydrogen bomb she'd designed. As a soldier, he followed orders without question. Immediately after the test blast, he always led a collection team into Ground Zero to gather samples for analysis. Like the ordinary soldiers, he had virtually no protection except a gas mask, and he picked up the hot samples with a pair of thin cotton gloves. This time, he had received a deadly dose of radiation. He was rough and unrefined. He had raped her, and she had hated him, but she never meant to kill him. At least now, he deserved some sympathy. Her hand smoothed the white sheet that covered him, as if she could ease his pain, and she gave silent thanks to Commissar Chu for giving her a leave of absence. Still, watching him die was mentally draining. After a long while, her eyes drooped, and her chin sank to her chest. Then suddenly, she jerked back to awareness, seeming to hear Major Liu calling her name. She leaned over the bed. His eyes were open, and though his pupils didn't move, his gaze still bore into her. "Major Liu, do you want to say something?" asked Zoe. There was no reaction, even when she repeated her question. Reaching down to her bag, she pulled out a photo and held it up in front of his eyes. "This is Xiao Hong, your daughter. She's almost 4 years old now. You see how beautiful she is?" For a second, his lips curled and his eyes gleamed. Zoe was glad she could offer him some comfort. "We haven't seen her for nearly 3 years. When you recover, we will go to Beijing together to visit her." His mouth opened, as if he wanted to say something, but the words couldn't make it past his tongue. She bent over him, straining to hear as his stiff, chapped lips moved with agonizing slowness. With a final effort, he croaked, "Hong, Xiao Hong." Zoe's eyes brimmed with tears. He had never cared for her, but at least he loved their child. She ached for Xiao Hong, who would scarcely remember her father, much less have the chance to feel his love. Laying the photo in his claw-like palm, she bent her head, surrendering to the sorrow that welled up inside her. Tears rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto his white bedsheet. His eyes closed again, whether it because his strength was gone or because he despised her weakness. She would never know. Major Liu was dead. To the on-site workers and in official party statements, he was a hero who had given his life searching for a nomadic family that had wandered, against strict orders, into the test zone. However, fearing a backlash against the danger of nuclear radiation, the party's central committee decided not to use Major Liu's death for propaganda. Commissar Chu suggested he be buried at the top of a hill where he could have a clear view of the nuclear test site, and Zoe agreed. No important officials or party members attended the simple ceremony. Only Zoe, Commissar Chu, and one other officer. A team of soldiers lowered the wooden box into a deep hole, covered it with compacted soil, and topped the site with rocks. Zoe put the last rock on the top and bowed, taking a long breath as she stepped back and viewed the grave. Reading the red characters and seeing his photo there, she felt calm, freed of the fear, resentment, and grief that had marked her for so long. She should have hated him, hated how he had warped her life. He made her ashamed to face her parents and guilty about her relationship with Igor. Worst of all, she had given up on John and renounced all hope of happiness. Standing next to his tomb, she felt herself emptied, released from the past. He was gone. The marriage was over. The rope that had bound her to him frayed and fell away, leaving her almost floating with a sense of liberation. Now she could tell her daughter and her parents about him. Major Liu, a legendary figure, a national hero.